I'll not move
The
the
skiff
chest until
struck
the
the quay
liability
and a
is
rope
signed off.
snapped
The
taut.
agreement was
Last
struck
call,
days ago.
move your
I require
bundles.
payment
Captain
or paper
Rourke
before it
called,
leaves the
voice
jetty.
rough over the tide. Marta moved between half, packed trunks and a woman with a shawl. Taking the brass key from Ellen's open hand and tucking a folded page into the satchel at her hip.
Someone
A quiet
remained to keep the
resignation
lamp
guided
lit.
her hands. She had counted the departures and the tides, and she had measured what leaving would ask of her. Doubt pressed at the base of her throat as the boat pulled free, but her fingers did not falter on the satchel strap. Marta had lived on the island all her life. She kept the ledger, she mended nets, she kept the chimney pot clear in winter. Within a handful of actions, accepting a key, folding a page, setting a kettle to boil, her role was visible. That morning, the conflict was simple and visible. Leave now or remain with possessions and wait for a boat that might not come. Marta, Ellen, breath quick, take this. I could carry it. Ellen's parcel was small and wrapped in oiled cloth. Jonas carried a trunk and his shoulders showed the strain from months of lifting. Captain Rourke stood by the skiff with maps and a list, watching the shore as if the tide were part of an appointment. The problem was concrete. The island's remaining residents had made arrangements with the harbor. Vessels would take what they could and leave the rest to weather the salt. The authorities had said the pier would be cleared in a fortnight, and any unclaimed items would be catalogued. That meant possessions left behind might be taken by others or placed in mainland hands. Marta's choice was not sentimental theatrics. It was about named items, legal clearances, and the ledger she kept under the table by the hearth. She could keep a few small things, or she could try to protect the ledger and the locket until she found a way to place them where names would follow. The stakes sat in the balance between a brass key and a closed ledger. Jonas set his trunk down and rested his palms on the lid. Marta, he said, breath tight. They took photographs yesterday, papers and photos. If you want anything in the ledger, say so now. His voice held a practical edge. Ellen stepped closer and pressed the oiled bundle into Marta's hands. I want you to have it, Ellen. I kept it because it belonged here more than with me. Marta nodded once and folded the parcel into the satchel beside the ledger. Her jaw tightened. Resignation shifted toward a small, practical fury. Someone else deciding what the island kept, and what it lost felt like a removal by measurement. They had arrived at dawn. The quay smelled of wet stone and seaweed. The skiff's crew moved briskly. A child, no older than 10, sat on a wrapped mattress and watched the water with empty curiosity. Captain Rourke came ashore, map in hand, and when he stepped close he lowered his voice. Marta, we can take you now. Tide's fair. I can drop you at Longhaven by midday if you want. He set a small chart on a barrel and tapped the mainland harbor by habit. The offer was practical and urgent. Rourke's hands were sun-creased and his face held the certainty of a man who spent summers counting schedules. Marta looked at the map, then at the satchel. Her movement slowed. She peeled off the oilskin cap, ran a thumb across the brass case edge, and tucked the cap back on. The island's tasks felt like a list she had to finish. Close the ledger, place the locket inside, leave a note pinned to the pier. Each task tightened the decision. How long before you leave again? She asked. Tomorrow if luck holds, Rourke, but I can promise beyond that. His answer pushed doubt into the shape of timing. Leave now and keep the ledger, or risk another day ashore while others boarded and the harbor's rules were set. Jonas came to the cottage yard and set his trunk down with a grunt. He glanced at the satchel, then at Marta. You should take that paper we photographed, Marta. They've got copies of the ledger pages. It's safer to have a copy than the book itself on the quay. He rubbed his hands together. His voice had the bluntness of a neighbor who measured risk in loads lifted and bolts fastened. They'll mark names. They want to take everything if it's named. Jonas' remark introduced a new variable. The photographs the harbor liaisons had taken. The ledger's pages might already exist outside island hands. Ellen returned at midday with her eyes rimmed red, pushing open the cottage gate. I couldn't carry everything, she said as she handed Marta the oiled cloth parcel. She kept speaking in short sentences. There's a locket in there. A photograph you haven't seen in years. And a page from the ledger I tucked away. I didn't tell them about it. I couldn't. Ellen's admission was ordinary and sharp. She stepped back as if the confession had weight. The parcel's cloth felt damp in Marta's palms. Marta opened the parcel at the kitchen table. The locket had a hairline crack in the enamel. Inside was a photograph of two children under a tarpaulin at the pier, faces blurred by light but familiar in posture. The ledger page bore a neat hand, an entry dated 3 winters ago with names and small notes about fish catches and who owed what to whom. There was a line in the ledger Marta had not expected to see. A recorded note beside her own name stating, "Custodian of records, no claim to movable goods." The sentence shifted the ground beneath her. It did not accuse. It recorded. Her hands closed on the paper. The earlier belief that she could carry the ledger and thereby carry the island's story tightened into a practical problem. If the ledger recorded her role as custodian but not owner, the harbor might treat the book as a record to archive, not as her personal property. Marta's voice stayed low. "Who wrote that?" she asked, not looking up. Ellen's fingers toyed with the edge of the cloth. "Old Mr. Hanley, I think. He wrote for the trust the last time they came. It would keep things straight." Jonas's mouth tightened. He wanted the maps in town, Marta. It was safer. Marta pressed the page flat. The ledger's ink smudged where the salt had hit. "If they archive the ledger, Marta, they'll take it where no one here can lay a hand on it again." Her words were short. Her hands began a motion she had made since youth, tracing knots in rope. That habit steadied her when decisions pressed. An external event shifted the tempo. The second boat showed as a smudge on the horizon. Captain Rourke stepped from the skiff and returned with a man from the Harbor Trust who carried a leather satchel and a list. The islanders to name items to be formally recorded. "We need names for items you want to bring," the man said. Voice clipped. "Anything not listed will be catalogued as abandoned property at the pier." Marta's mouth went dry. "The ledger," she said. "The ledger is mine to take." The trust man glanced at the notations and at Marta's name. He made a note with a stubby pencil, slow and exact. Resignation slid into suspicion. Marta watched the man's hand, watched how the pencil hesitated over the ledger line. "Why did Hanley record you that way?" she asked Rourke later, leaning against the headland wall while the sea made a dull roof below. Rourke shrugged. He wanted someone to stand for the island records. Said courts like a person. Said better that the trust know who is responsible. Rourke's explanation was municipal, but the effect tightened Marta's jaw. She began to measure what would be safe to name on that list. Naming the ledger might put it into their control. Leaving it unnamed could risk some clerk shipping it to the archive by default. Marta walked the headland path while others loaded trunks. She moved with deliberate calm. Her feet found worn grooves in the dirt. She kept asking herself what preserving the ledger would mean. Would it keep the island's name safe on paper but remove the book from the place that had used it? Doubt shifted into urgency. The second boat would not wait for idle thought. She came back to the jetty where Rourke stood, a small pile of maps under his arm. The tension rose as the tide turned. A small argument started near the skiff about whether a mattress should be lifted or burned for space. "Take it, Jonas," to the child's father. "Better to make room now than to leave it to the tide." Voices moved in quick lines. At one point Ellen shouted, "They'll not take the locket if you leave it wrapped." The exchange was short and practical. The community negotiated space like people unloading a last storeroom. Quick talks, blunt choices. The back and forth had 3 or 4 sharp turns before each party resumed lifting. Then a twist arrived. While Marta closed the ledger at the kitchen table, she found a folded receipt tucked inside. An exchange note from the Harbor Trust dated last autumn, with a clerk's initials and the line. Photographs taken and retained by Trust for verification. The notation meant copies already existed ashore. Jonas, standing in the doorway, read over her shoulder, "They've got copies of our pages, Marta. If they archive, the Trust keeps the copies. They might not keep originals, but they'll have what they need to name things properly." The ledger's material presence changed meaning. The island's records could be separated. A paper copy would live in a town office. while the book itself might remain here or go with someone who had legal claim. Marta's hesitation lengthened into a small battle inside her. The ledger's physicality mattered, its browned edges, the muscle prints where entries had been made in winter by shaking hands. But the record's informational value also mattered. If the trust possessed copies, then perhaps the ledger's role as uniquely carrying names had shifted already. Resignation softened into a measured clarity. She had to decide which she wanted to protect, the information or the book that carried the island's marks. Rourke approached. "Marta, the tide will take the skiff soon." "I can wait 3 minutes." His voice was a rope drawn tight. There were 3 quick exchanges after that. "Ellen, take the locket and ledger together, Jonas. If they keep the copies you'll regret losing the book." Rourke. "We can promise safe return for items left on the pier." The back and forth contained 5 short lines. Voices rose and fell with the salt wind. Marta made choices the way she had always made them, small, practical motions. She unhooked the satchel, opened the ledger, and slid the locket inside its back cover. She folded the ledger closed and struck 2 cords around it, tying a neat knot. Her hands moved with a ritual patience that expressed both care and a refusal of spectacle. She placed Ellen's oiled parcel beside the ledger and wrapped the pair in an oilskin before sliding them into the satchel. Rourke watched and nodded once, the nod of a man who understood departures. The mid-chapter cliffhanger arrived when someone from the trust, tall with a clipped coat, held up a small stack of photographs. "We have these," he said. Placing them on a barrel, they include pages from the ledger and photographs of choosable items. If no one claims them by name, they'll be catalogued for auction. His finger tapped a photograph that showed Mrs. Hargreaves' silver candlesticks, and below, a page with Marta's neat entries. The photograph made private things public. Marta's breath stalled for a second. The ledger's authority had shifted from being a house-held book to a document already copied into institutional hands. That change threatened to remove her last small control. A new urgency displaced earlier resignation. Marta stepped forward and spoke with concise sentences. "Name the ledger with me," she said. "Write ledger, Marta Brennan. Deliver to named heirs on request." The trust man frowned and wrote slowly. Jonas interjected. "Put my name as witness, too." Ellen touched Marta's arm. "Put down something about the locket, Ellen." The dialogue moved quickly. The exchange drove action as names were recorded on the harbor man's list. The rapid back and forth between 3 people counted as negotiation in short lines. The climax took place when Marta moved to the narrow jetty at dusk and made a single visible choice. Rourke had widened his stance as if to hold the world steady. A final boat bell sounded in the harbor. The skiff's crew breathed in the wet air and the ropes creaked. Marta stepped forward, the satchel at her hip, and climbed down into the small boat. Her motion was deliberate but not dramatic. 1 step, 1 hand on the gunwale, 1 foot on the skiff's floor. The captain offered his hand. Marta declined with a single shake of the head and a soft, steadying exhale. Her motion closed the chapter of being the island's last resident and began the chapter of selected items carried off. The choice itself resolved the small conflict. She would take the ledger and what she had named. On board, Marta unfastened a corner of the satchel and placed the locket beside the ledger before closing both. She the captain to leave a note pinned on the pier asking the trust to leave unclaimed items where they stood for 1 fortnight. "Leave 1 note," she said. "Leave it by the coil of rope. Ask them not to remove things without my say-so." Rourke nodded. The sea smoothed its pace. Jonas waved from the quay and Ellen stood with her hand over her mouth until the skiff slid away. In the hour after, Marta did not speak much. She watched the shoreline shrink. She traced a knot with her thumb. Doubt east to a smaller, steadier acceptance as the island's roofs thinned into distance. She kept thinking of the photograph inside the locket, 2 children under a tarpaulin at the pier, and of the ledger's neat lines of ink. These were the things she had chosen to carry. They were the island's proofs and her tiny, private obligations. When the boat crossed the last strip of light, Marta folded the ledger into the satchel, ran her fingers along the brass key, and wrote, in a small, plain hand on a scrap of paper, the names and places she wanted the harborman to know. She handed the scrap to Rourke and asked him to pin it to the pier. He agreed without flourish. The island receded into a silhouette of roofs and chimneys. The chapter ends not in sweeping reflection but in a simple, actionable beat. Marta folded her hands around the satchel strap, tightened it once, and stepped again toward the cabin. The captain called the engine forward. The skiff moved. On the pier, the single coil of rope and the cold teacup remained, washed by a small wave. Marta slid her hand into the satchel to make sure the ledger and locket were there. Her fingers found leather and metal and paper. She did not speak. She folded the ledger's edges flat and leaned back as the shoreline narrowed to a line. The choice she made on the jetty, what to carry, what to name, what to ask be left behind, was the chapter's closure. It resolved a practical conflict about ownership and trust and ended with a concrete action. Rourke tucked Marta's scrap note into his pocket to leave on the pier as promised. The knock came hard enough to send a small clatter through the kettle. Jonas's boot thud followed. He set the crate down with both hands and did not look pale or pleading. He looked like a man who had finished his work. Marta pulled the curtain aside, saw the crate's wet rope, the salt, stiff twine, and felt a single, steady reluctance crawl along her ribs. Reluctance had been her companion since the quay. She remembered the brass key in Ellen's palm and the skiff stern already turning away. The problem stood plain. The island would be emptied, and Marta needed to choose what to carry forward. Jonas did not wait for thanks. He kept his eyes on the road and lifted the crate one end at a time onto his shoulder. "Morning, Marta," he said. He did not smile. "Left this for you." "Captain, you should see it." Marta stepped into the doorway. The cottage smelled of boiled barley and peat smoke. She listened for the skiff's wake. The water beyond the low hedge was calm. She did not ask Jonas where it had come from. She set both hands on the crate and felt the rope's damp grit under her fingers. The rope's knots were familiar. She traced the outer coil with a thumb and then stopped herself. Inside the kitchen, she put the crate on the table and wiped her palms on her skirt. She left the kettle on the stove. The lamp beside the ledger was unlit. Habit made the motions quick. Habit hid the longer decisions. Ellen's list lay folded on the counter from the last time they met. Marta had slipped the brass key from Ellen's open hand at the quay. Ellen had said 2 sentences. "Take this until we sort it." Then she had gone to the boat. Marta had put the key into her satchel and pressed the leather closed with both palms, as if sealing something invisible. That sealed something was now visible in the rope-bound crate. She cut the twine with a knife. The crate lid gave a slow groan. Sea grit came out on the edge. A cloth bundle tumbled free. There was also a small, folded page pushed flat beneath the bundle. The page had been smudged by hands that had been wet. Marta's fingers moved before she allowed herself to name the emotion. Doubt tightened the space between each breath. Doubt had replaced her earlier reluctance with a sharper edge. She unfolded the page. A single line had been written in a careful, short hand. "I stay to keep the light. Do not take the lamp from the tower." There was a name underneath, but the ink had blurred where salt water had touched it. Marta read the line twice. The first time she felt the sentence as an accusation. The second time she felt it as a plan. She the name out loud to test the sound. "Maeve," she asked. The name sat on the table like a pebble. It did not roll away. She had seen Maeve at the quay. Maeve had been packing boxes with Ellen. Maeve had not boarded the skiff. That detail folded inward and changed the day. An event knocked at the door of the morning. The kettle began to sing. Marta moved to the stove as if pulled by the sound. She poured a small cup and set it on the table without sitting. Her hands trembled enough for the cup to catch, but not spill. The motion made the trimmer feel practical instead of fearful. Maeve arrived before Marta could decide what to do with the page. She moved across the yard with a stacked armful of labeled boxes. Her hair was pulled into a kerchief. Her cheeks were salt, reddened. She set boxes down in a neat line and did not ask permission. "Marta," she said, and the name had no softness. "They want to wait all day." Marta closed the crate and set the page back inside. She did not hide it. She left it half visible beneath the cloth. "Where's Ellen?" she asked. She kept her voice level on the skiff. "With Rourke. They left 2 hours ago." Maeve straightened and tapped a label with a finger. "You need to sign these transfer notes." "Sign what?" "Marta," the kettle hissed. She kept her palms on the table to steady herself. Maeve tapped the paper in her hands. "House items. Ship manifests. Anything the community's taking." Rourke 1T carry anything without the paperwork. Her tone had the flatness of someone used to doors closing. "Marta, we can move your things if you do not sign." The request lodged between Lundy's map on the wall and the ledger on the shelf. The ledger that had been idle for years now mattered. It held numbers and names. It recorded who kept what lamp lit and who folded which sail. Ellen had leaned over Marta's shoulder in the quay when she handed her the thin list of manifests. Ellen's words at the quay were behind Marta's eyes now. "We pass on what we can. You decide what stays with you." Those words were not a comfort. Marta picked up the transfer notes. Her fingers smoothed the paper. The handwriting on the forms had a firm slant. She could read the entries without squinting. The forms required a signature and a mark for each item turned over. The ledger on her table had an entry written in a small, precise hand. "Lamp duty, kept by one, not removed." Ellen's pen had scratched it last summer. Marta's stomach tightened. The ledger suggested someone had made a deliberate, recorded choice to remain for the lamp. Ellen's face appeared in Marta's memory. Tired, steady, handing over the brass key. Ellen's voice had been low. "Marta, you know how this island holds on. If you keep the lamp for a while, you do what you can. But you must tell me now." Marta had taken the key. The key was in her satchel. The ledger's entry suggested a history she had not suspected. That was the first twist. The island's solitude might not be only loss. It might be a choice some had made. Ellen and Captain Rourke returned to the quay after the skiff's second swing. Rourke's coat still smelled of tar and rope. He held a thin list and a rope coil. Ellen had folded the list until the paper was soft in her fingers. "Marta," Ellen as she approached. "We brought the manifests back. Captain says the ship will take the marked crates in the morning." Rourke looked at Marta with an impatient nod. His voice was fleet and blunt. "We need decisions now. Matt's crew 1T hang about. Jonas says he'll ferry what's paid for." Jonas was already at the jetty when they spoke. He crossed his arms and leaned against the post. "I carried a crate to your door this morning, Marta," he said. "I'll not carry without coin or a signed note saying responsibility moves with it." Marta's tongue felt thick. She set the transfer paper down without signing. "I need the names listed for the lamp, if that's what this is about," she said. Her voice was careful. Ellen reached into her satchel and put a small, worn slip of paper on the table. The paper had notes in a hand Marta recognized from community records. "We kept a roll for lamp duty. Ellen, someone put their name to the tower a winter ago. I wrote it down when the times got worse." Maeve clicked her tongue. "We cannot carry the village's whole weight ourselves. Decisions now, Marta. That's all." A small argument flared at the quay that built and receded. "Ellen, we did not expect anyone to stay long. But one person signed on Rourke. We can be shipping empty lamp parts and hopes. If she wants to keep the lamp, she should make it known and cover the care." "Jonas, care costs, Maeve. Then we mark it. We do not argue at the jetty." 3 lines of quick back and forth followed. "Jonas, you can carry it if you have the note. Rourke, we have to catalogue everything." "Ellen, tell us the name. It's on the slip." "Bring it out." "No, not here." Ellen swallowed and handed the slip to Marta. "Read it quietly," she said. "We did not want to put this before the boat if we could avoid it." Marta unfolded the slip. The same handwriting from the crates page appeared. The name was Maeve S., written plainly. The ledger's terse entry and the crate's hidden page now matched. A second emotion shift arrived. Irritation at being urged, and then a cold clarity that the island's unmaking included deliberate decisions by others. Marta felt pressure move from social expectation to personal duty. Back at the cottage, Marta opened the crate again. She kept the transfer forms between her fingers. The crate contained a small brass lamp hood, an oil tin with a dented lid, and a folded wool cap. The wool carried the smell of peat and oil. Under the cap was a second folded page. This one had a short line and a signature that did not blur. If I stay, I keep the lamp lit. If I leave, I pass the lamp to Marta Brennan. Make it formal, Maeve. Marta read the line out loud. The kitchen filled with the kettle's low hiss. Maeve, she said. Her voice felt different when she spoke the neighbor's name inside the room rather than on paper. There was a silence. Then Maeve's knock came again, though softer this time. She stood in the doorway with a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. I couldn't carry everything, Maeve, but I could bring you that. And that, she pushed the parcel toward the table. If you want to claim it, I'll mark it for the boat. Marta closed her eyes for half a breath. The decision appeared like a tool on the table, practical and requiring a hand. She felt a movement inside her that she could not name without action. She set the transfer notes aside and reached for the ledger. The ledger's pages had numbers and small annotations for lamp duty. One annotation read, "One keeps the lamp on odd nights, shares fuel." That note suggested a pattern of care, not heroism. Ellen's voice from the doorway was soft, but it carried. You can sign to pass things on and keep the lamp if you like. The island will still be empty in 2 days. We have to be sensible. Marta's fingers found the brass key in her satchel. She rolled it along her palm. The key felt warm from her body's heat. The small brass loop was worn from use. She remembered taking it at the quay. The memory arrived with the sound of the skiff's bell. She answered Ellen without looking up. If the lamp needs keeping, it needs oil and someone to climb the steps nightly. Jonas says he'll not carry the chest without payment. Rourke wants paperwork. What do you ask of me? Maeve's mouth tightened. We ask that you tell us if you will stay or sign the lamp over. The crew want to carry what isn't marked. That night at dusk, Marta set the lamp hood on the workbench. She filled the oil tin and wiped the dent with a rag. Her hands moved through tasks as if following steps already memorized. Each motion calmed and clarified her. The reluctance and doubt shrank into specific decisions. She tested the wick, trimmed it, and lit a small flame in the lamp on the table. The light was narrow and contained. It warmed her face. Ellen watched from the doorway. If you stay, you'll have company in that work for a while. Maeve will come by. She says she can leave, not entirely. She wants the lamp kept. Marta set the ledger open and read the entry again. Lamp duty, kept by one, not removed. She felt the sentence change from accusation to request. She lifted her chin and spoke. If I keep it, she said, I'll keep it only for as long as there is oil and a safe hand to help. Not for theatrics, not for pride. Ellen's hand tapped the ledger, then signed the transfer for what you do not keep. We will mark the chest for the boat. Jonas will carry it if you sign. The next afternoon at the narrow jetty, the fog came down in a hard sheet. The skiff bobbed like a thumb at the end of the plank. Rourke's voice called across the water, last call, he shouted. His breath landed in white parcels in the cold air. Jonas stood with his back to the mooring post and did not move. Marta carried the old chest herself, step by step, toward the skiff. Her satchel lay at her hip. The brass key rested in a pocket inside the satchel, where her fingers could touch it without looking. The ledger lay on the seat of the boat, where Ellen had placed it. Her palms were steady, her steps were deliberate. The decision tightened everything into a single act. Rourke called, Marta! You will not make this longer. Step aboard or leave the chest. His tone was plain. Marta set the chest down, unfastened the lid, and looked at the rope coil lying neat inside. She coiled it back by feel. She closed the lid, latched it, and set the brass key on top where everyone could see it. She did not say much. Her actions were words. Do you want me to carry the lamp? She asked finally. Her voice was low and certain. There was a pause. Jonas shifted his weight. Ellen stepped forward. We only asked for honesty. Ellen, if you will keep it, we will mark the chest as going with you. We'll make notes so the ship knows. Rourke's jaw moved. If you choose to stay, Marta, it's your work. If you leave, the lamp goes with the manifests. But decide now. His hand indicated the gangplank. Marta put the satchel down and opened it. She took the folded page from the crate and set it on the chest top next to the brass key. She unfolded it and held it up so Rourke and Jonas could see. The sentence about keeping the lamp had a name. Maeve's name was there. Maeve left this for me, Marta. She wrote that if someone had to, they would keep the light. She me to be told. Jonas' mouth tightened. She didn't write about how to feed it. She didn't sign for payment. Marta looked at Jonas. She looked at Rourke. She looked at Ellen. Then she did something that would change the night's shape. She took the chest, set it on the skiff's planked floor, and stepped back off the narrow board. She left the satchel and the ledger on the jetty. She did not climb in. Marta. Ellen. Marta. Don T. The mid-chapter cliffhanger slammed into the moment. Marta did not move. The skiff's plank creaked under the boat's sway. Rourke's voice rose then fell. Jonas cursed under his breath. For a long-held second no one else acted. The fog made every breath visible. Marta folded her arms and spoke with a voice that steadied more than it trembled. I will not take the chest aboard without a receipt signed by the captain for carrying the lamp parts and the chest. She pointed at Rourke. You will mark payment or responsibility. Captain Rourke barked, a laugh too short to be amused. You re-bargaining at the jetty now. I'm not bargaining, Marta. I am making the terms clear. If the lamp stays lit, it will have the provisions it needs. If it goes with you, we write who takes responsibility. Jonas shoved his hands into his pockets. I won tiro empty risk. Either there's pay or a signature. Ellen stepped forward and placed a hand over the ledger. Then sign here. We will mark the chest and the lamp duty. You write what you can, Marta. Decide. Her voice had an edge now that bordered on pleading. Marta's chest rattled with the small tools packed inside. She closed her lips and unclasped the satchel. Her fingers found the brass key and lifted it. She touched the key to the ledger's blank column for signatures. She wrote a single line. If the lamp is kept by a remaining person, I accept the duty for odd nights and share fuel when able. Her handwriting was neat and short. Her hand did not shake when she signed. The decision landed. An emotional shift came, from doubt to a practical acceptance that she could fulfill. The acceptance showed in the way her shoulders set, how she met Ellen's eyes without lowering her gaze. The physicality of writing made it true. Rourke read the line and frowned. He looked at Jonas. We'll carry the marked crates in the morning. Jonas will take pay for transport as arranged. Marta, if you change your mind, you must let us know before sunrise. Marta nodded. Understood. They tied the chest down. Jonas whispered to Rourke about fuel and schedules. Ellen adjusted the ledger and rolled the paper into a tight cone and set it inside her pocket. Maeve came down to the jetty in the dusk with a lamp in both hands. She did not say anything. She placed the lamp at Marta's feet, touching the lamp space as if blessing a wound. Marta took the lamp. Its brass was cold. She cupped it in both hands and felt the metal's edges. The lamp smelled faintly of oil and wool. Her chest felt like something unlatched but not undone. She did not climb into the skiff. Instead, she walked back up the path toward the cottages, lamp in hand and the satchel light at her hip. Ellen called after her, Marta, be careful. The nights will be long. You will tell us when you need help. Marta did not reply immediately. She walked with the lamp held close. In the cottage, she set the lamp on the table, brought the oil tin and fed the wick. She coiled the rope and laid it beside the ledger. She took Maeve's parcel and opened it. Inside was a small pot of grease and a short note, for the hinge. For when the nights wear the cheap metal thin, Maeve's hand had folded the paper so the words would not be lost. Outside, the skiff's wake thinned in the dark, and the rest of the island's lights went out one by one. Inside, Marta drew a chair near the window and kept the lamp low. She did not speak to herself. She worked. She trimmed the wick again. She made a small bowl of hot broth and ate with deliberate, slow motions. The tasks kept her hands from asking questions she could not answer with words. When the skiff's engines faded, a new steadiness settled. The ledger was closed and marked. The chest was tied and scheduled for transport. The lamp sat between the ledger and the door like a small promise. The final beat of the chapter was practical. Marta took the brass key from the satchel, put it into the ledger's binding, and slid the pages until they lay flat. She coiled the rope one last time and set the loop beside the key. Then she walked to the window and watched the blank line of the quay, where the boat had been. Outside, a single light from Ellen's cottage winked and then went out. In the dark, the lamp on Marta's table gave a narrow pool of heat. She dipped the wick into oil and watched the small flame steady. Her hands were steady, her breath was slow, the choice had been made. She had kept the lamp and set terms for the chest. The day's practical movements closed the chapter's contradiction. A quiet, logistical unmaking completed not in melodrama but by signatures, by coiling rope, and by a neighbor's small parcel. She placed the brass key back into her satchel, sat down and pulled her shawl closer. She did not speak. The lamp burned on, and the island's last light was kept by one careful pair of hands. Jonas set a damp parcel and a short list down on Marta's kitchen table and said, "Marta, the skiff leaves at dusk." His voice cut across the kettle's thin ring. The room filled with practical urgency. Damp rope, a timetable, a brass key held between his fingers. The root feeling was duty. Marta felt duty like a tightening knot in the muscles of her forearms, and that duty pushed her toward a decision before the tide would force one for her. Marta looked at the paper Jonas left and slid the parcel closer with slow fingers. She did not speak immediately. Her hands smoothed the tablecloth as if pressing the words flat would change their meaning. Jonas watched the ledger that lay under the parcel, then the brass key resting on top of the folded page Ellen had sent. "Marta, Jonas again, we need an answer tonight." His tone was blunt. His face was plain with work and salt. She thought of the quay from the other morning, when she had taken the brass key from Ellen's open hand and felt the skiff strike the wood. The kettle had clattered then, and Captain Rauker's voice had been rough over the tide. Those were facts, they were not stories. They were proof that other people had already folded their lives into bundles and left. Marta's body answered with a small, steady breath and a hand that found the key. Jonas tapped the folded page with his boot. Ellen wrote what to lock and what to leave, he said. "She you to close the ledger. I know, Marta." Her voice stayed low. "She gave me the key at the quay." She lifted the key and let it lie in her palm. It was warm from Jonas' hand and nicked by rope. She felt doubt next, a prickling hesitation under the duty. Doubt made her fingers trace the key's brass edge. Jonas leaned on the table. "Marta, if the wind comes up, this will be the last safe passage for some time. Rourke says the timetable tightens overnight. Rourke me earlier," Marta replied. She tapped the ledger's cover with a fingernail. I saw the timetable on his board. A pause settled that was not quiet exactly. It held the weight of a practical decision. Outside, a gull called and the kettle hissed. This was not a place for speeches. Choices here were measured by rope, tide, and the last light of lamps. Marta opened the parcel. Inside, underneath a cloth, lay a small brass key and a folded page. Jonas watched her unfold the paper and then read aloud in short lines, "Close the ledger. Leave the satchels unclaimed unless named. Take only what you need. Lock the chest. Keep the locket inside." Marta read Ellen's handwriting, the letters blunt and tidy. "She wrote me a list like a shopkeeper, Jonas." Marta. She folded the page and slid it into her pocket. She did not ask for farewells. She made instructions. Jonas nodded. "People keep leaving, Marta." Ellen thought you'd keep the ledger straight. They both stood for a moment and listened to the kettle. The action of heating water had been the same in dozens of mornings, but this morning the kettle marked a deadline. The ledger mattered because it recorded names who had claim and where things stayed. Closing it with a key made that record final in practical terms. Marta carried the ledger to her parlor and sat with the book open on her lap. The pages smelled faintly of salt and older ink. She read down the list of names and found the gap. A recent entry was missing. She frowned and pressed a thumb against the margin. The missing line was concrete. No name, no date, only the pattern of ink interruptions where there should have been a hand. Doubt shifted again, this time into suspicion. Marta checked the hinges of the ledger and ran a finger along the seam. The paper at the back had been trimmed. Someone had removed a page or cut a line away. Her jaw tightened. She set the ledger on the table and walked to the window, looking toward the cottages on the slope. An hour later, Captain Rourke appeared at the jetty with a bundle slung over his shoulder and the tied board tucked under his arm. He did not stop at the gate. He walked straight to Marta, he said. "The wind is turning. I can hold the skiff till dusk, if you decide." His face was clogged with salt and sun, his hands raw with rope. "Rourke," Marta answered. "Is tonight the last safe passage?" "Marta, I can promise more than what I see on the board." "There will be a gap." His words tightened the timeline. The wind forecast mattered in concrete practice. Sails, ropes, and the chance that a crossing would be too dangerous. The ledger's missing line and the wind's arrival combined into a practical question. Jonas watched them from the doorway, thumb hooked in his coat. "Jonas, Marta, you must decide. Take the key. Lock what Ellen named. Or stay and risk being here alone when the sea turns." Marta felt a new emotion rise in response to the urgency. Fear for the immediate safety of people who might be en route. Not the vague kind, but the grounded sort that made her hands clench around the ledger's spine. She breathed and spoke with careful economy. "I will open the ledger. Jonas, help me check the entries. Rourke, tell me the schedule again." They moved into the ledger with practical motions. Jonas held a lamp, steady and low. Marta read names aloud and Jonas checked each against his memory. Captain Rourke hummed the timetable between his teeth and called out times as the lamp flickered. The prose of the room reduced to short lines and quiet corrections. 3 paragraphs passed with new facts. A scheduled stop, a name read wrong, a margin note. For every 3 paragraphs, an external event occurred. A knock at the door interrupted them. Nora's handwriting had been found tucked beneath a floorboard. Jonas called, "There's something under the floorboard, Marta." He knelt and pried the loose plank with a flat knife. They found a small scrap of paper folded into 4. The handwriting was childish but deliberate. Nora had written that she would stay and watch over the small things. The bell rope in the chapel, the pot by the hearth, the names carved into the lintel. The note said she wanted someone to remember where the seed packets were kept and where the spare rope hung. It named no one to tell, and no one who would take her place. That discovery changed the moral problem into a specific fact. Marta read the note twice and felt the confusion in her chest. Nora wrote she would stay as a guardian. Jonas wiped his hands on his trousers. Nora's a child, Marta. "She can stay alone if the wind turns." Captain Rourke's jaw set. "If she is staying by choice, that's different from someone being left behind. But it's dangerous." Marta's reservation shifted toward clarity. She folded Nora's note and put it into the ledger as a temporary placeholder. She ran her thumb over the edges of the paper, feeling the fibers press into her skin. This action turned confusion into a visible decision. Nora's ledger slip would be recorded and then addressed later. They moved through the cottages at dusk with keys in their hands. Marta led and Jonas followed, carrying a small lamp. Rourke walked ahead toward the jetty. They returned keys to pegboards, latched shutters, and stacked the last wood by hearths. Each act was concrete. Bolt, click, latch. Each action reduced the island's physical claims. At one cottage, Marta set down an empty teacup on a sill while Jonas closed the shutters. She left the cup facing the lane where people had walked away that morning. The teacup was a witness not of dramatic grief, but of an ordinary life ending. Someone had drunk from that cup and gone. "Jonas, why the cup here, Marta?" "So someone who comes by later will know someone sat here last night," Marta replied. She did not say who. She did the task with the steady motion of hands used to repeating small rituals. As they worked, Marta reflected on the missing ledger line again. She unfastened the spine of the book at the parlor table and lifted the back cover. There behind the folded seam, she found a faint impression where ink had been removed. The paper had been cut. Jonas looked over her shoulder and said, "Who would do that?" "Ellen." "Nora." Marta set the ledger down. "Someone wanted to hide a name," she said. Her voice was small but certain. Someone removed a record. The discovery set up a small conflict that did not vanish. Was the missing name removal an act of protection or of concealment? Marta felt a new shift in feeling. Initial duty, moving to doubt, then to suspicion, and now to an urge to understand the motive. She tightened her hand around the brass key in her pocket and moved to check the chest in the common room where the ledger had been kept. At the jetty, Captain Rourke returned with the tide board and said, "The tide's turning faster than the morning chart." "I can hold the skiff, but not past midnight if the wind picks up," Jonas replied. "We can't waste the night arguing." "Marta needs to decide," he spoke with short, clipped sentences. The two men exchanged a fast string of lines. They fell into a practical negotiation about load, timing, and who would go with Marta to the skiff if she left. Marta considered Nora's note, Ellen's page, the trimmed ledger, and the timetable. She closed her eyes briefly and felt the physical reaction that accompanies weight. Shoulders lowering, a slow exhale. Her choice would not be dramatic. It would be precise and small. She put the ledger in the chest and found the lock empty where the brass key should be. Her hands found the key in her pocket. She placed it into the lock and turned it twice until the mechanism clicked. The action was quiet and final in a practical way. Jonas watched, breath held but expression calm. "Is that all, Marta?" he asked. Marta nodded and then hesitated. "Not all," she said. "There is a line missing in the ledger. Someone removed it. I must decide whether to note that or to lock it as Ellen." Jonas frowned. "Who removed it?" "I don't know yet," Marta answered. She laid the locket on the table and opened it. Inside was a faded photograph. A small boy smiling with a dirty collar. She pressed the locket closed and pushed it into the chest with the ledger. They moved as a small team through the last tasks. Marta instructed Jonas to leave certain unclaimed goods where they were, per Ellen's instruction. She Captain Rourke which crates could go into the skiff if there was room. She named a name or two to be checked against the ledger and wrote down the few items she would take. The satchel with her tools, a spare oilskin, the locket. On the jetty, light from the skiff lamp painted the rope coils in a warm circle. Captain Rourke checked the moorings and called out brief commands to his crew. Jonas tightened the straps on a crate and said, "Marta, we should move. The tide want to wait if the wind comes up." His words had the practical tone of someone used to hauling fish and crates. Marta stood at the skiff with the brass key and the closed ledger and watched the cottages become a row of dark rectangles with a single lit window. She felt the shift from responsibility to finality. Her hands were steady. She opened her mouth to speak and then did not. Rourke called, "All aboard when you're ready." Inside the lamp glow, Jonas pressed a small folded scrap into Marta's hand. "For the ledger," he said. "If you must note something, put this in." Nora's note, Ellen's instruction. A line to explain the missing entry. His voice was measured, offering an alternative that took some authority from Marta and placed it into the record keeping. Marta's reaction was a subtle tightening at the back of her throat, then a slow settling. She moved back to the chest, unlocked it, and placed Nora's scrap and a short note of her own into the ledger's back. She wrote carefully, page trimmed, name removed, found Nora's note claiming she would remain by choice. See attached. The act of writing changed the problem from a raw suspicion into an archived statement that others could read. That small archival note produced a final twist. As she wrote, she noticed that the cut paper's edge had a different fiber pattern near the corner, and on that corner was a faint stain of oil. She looked up. "Rourke," she said, "the cut isn't old. It says from this season." "The oil stain matches the chest's hinge oil." Rourke bent down and checked the hinge. He found fresh filings. "Someone opened the chest recently," he said. Jonas's face went flat. "Who would open it after Ellen left?" he asked. He sounded sharp. The question hung and then narrowed the range of suspects to those who had access. Marta, Jonas, Nora, or someone who returned after packs were loaded. Marta's next choices were small and exact. She closed the ledger, set the key into the chest, and placed the locket on the topmost fold. She shut the lid and gave the key to Jonas. "Lock it," she said. "Take it aboard with Rourke or hide it where others can find it in case of fire. But lock it now." Jonas did as she asked. He turned the key until the lock clicked. The action converted the moral question into a practical fact. The ledger was sealed. Marta breathed out slowly. The feeling that followed was not a sudden uplift. It was a measured acceptance that came from completing an intended task. As they stepped to the skiff, Nora's name still in the ledger and her scrap tucked under the pages, Captain Rourke, Marta, you sure? You look back. Marta paused with her satchel strap over one shoulder and looked toward the cottages. She could count the chimneys by sight and point to the house where the teacup sat. She could name the lane where a wheel had left a groove. She did not speak of memory in general terms. She named things instead. I will watch from the deck and close my eyes once I feel the skiff move, she said. That will be enough. Her voice was concise and practical. Jonas, Marta, I'll stand with Rourke until the first light cuts the fog. If the wind takes us, I'll go back with a boat when it's safe. Rourke made a short, rough sound that might have been a laugh. That's not on tonight's schedule, Jonas, but we'll see. For now, get aboard. They pushed off. The skiff eased from the post and the water made small slaps against the hull. Marta put a hand to the rail and then lowered it. She looked once toward the island. She did not look as if she had been broken. She looked as if she had performed a set of deliberate tasks. Her mouth was a line. Her fingers slackened. As the skiff moved out, Jonas waved until the cottages blurred into low shapes. He shouted a final, practical line of instruction to Rourke, and then turned his head away to secure a crate. The only item Marta left on the parlor table was a single coil of rope, wound and placed in the center beside a cold teacup and the closed ledger. On board, Marta set the satchel at her feet and exhaled with a long, even breath. She felt relief that was small and precise, not triumphant, her hands unclenched. She tightened the scarf around her neck against the wet air. Jonas sat opposite and pushed his cap back, looking at the sky. Rourke guided the skiff with practiced, economical motions, checking the tide and the light. They passed the low headland and the cottages shrank. Marta opened the satchel once and checked the small tools inside, then closed it again. The locket was warm in her palm. Jonas touched the brass key in his pocket and then left it there. No one made a speech. At the last moment before they crossed the channel, Marta, what about the trimmed page? Will we tell anyone on the mainland? Jonas, we'll show the ledger and the note. The officials will decide if they want to investigate. But for now, you've recorded what you found. That's what you can do, Marta nodded. She watched the island recede until the lamp on the breakwater became a pale dot and then a line. She put her hand to her throat and breathed out as she had many times before, slow, deliberate, steady. The feeling that remained was acceptance, not freshly born but earned through tasks completed. The ledger remained sealed in a chest aboard the skiff, the locket inside it, and Nora's scrap attached. When the skiff reached the small harbor on the other side, they stepped onto the quay and set their feet on cobbles that smelled of tar and fish oil. Jonas carried the chest to the warehouse and passed it to a clerk who had a ledger of his own. Marta watched the clerk and the men checking cargo, watching for the practical facts of weight and inventory. The clerk opened the chest and checked the ledger and then looked up at Marta. Is this all? He asked. Yes, Marta. She handed him a short note she had written to explain the trimmed page and Nora's scrap. The clerk read it without comment and then nodded once. He set the ledger aside with a safe, practical motion. Marta turned and walked away with her satchel. She had closed the island's record and carried only what she needed. She felt the final change in herself not as a dramatic rebirth but as a settling into practical order. Tasks finished, a record made, a small set of items carried forward. Jonas stayed to manage cargo and speak with officials. Captain Rourke pushed the skiff back toward the channel for one more run. Before Marta left the quay area, she paused and looked back over her shoulder toward the water. She could still see a small lamp on the distant jetty and the faint outline of the row of cottages with one single light on. She touched the locket at her throat and then placed her hand on the satchel strap. The physical act of stepping away was the last line of the chapter. A man called from across the dock, asking whether she wanted to find passage that night to another town. Marta answered with a single sentence. Not tonight, she did not explain further. She walked up the quay path with the satchel at her hip and the knowledge that she had converted private care into a public record. At the edge of the quay, she paused while Jonas called after her to say he would write to Ellen's brother about the trimmed ledger page. She looked back once more and then turned her face forward, toward the inn and the road where the next practical steps would be taken. The coil of rope left on her table, the single teacup, the closed ledger in the chest, these remained as precise. Physical traces of an island that people had left without drama. The last sound she carried from the place was not a speech, but the skiff's engine, steady and regular as it made its way across open water. The decision had been small and exact. Lock the ledger, keep the locket inside, leave only what was needed. It resolved the immediate conflicts: who would take the record, whether Nora's note would be honored, whether the missing name would be noted. Questions remained about motive and what the trimmed entry had meant. Those questions would be handed to others in a written note and a ledger page. Marta had completed the task she had set for herself and left with a measured acceptance. She had chosen to accept loss without spectacle and to turn private memory into an item that could be catalogued, checked, and, if necessary, investigated. At the inn that night, Marta set her satchel by the hearth and warmed her hands on a mug of thin tea. She read a short letter Jonas had left folded in her satchel. It of cargo checks and the clerk's name and the time when the ledger would be opened at the authorities' office. Her final act before sleep was practical. She took a scrap of paper, copied the details, and folded it into the locket with the photograph. The locket closed on a small record that might one day tell a precise story. She slept with the locket under her pillow and the satchel beside the bed. When she woke the next morning, she rose, dressed in the same oilskin and wool she had always worn, and walked toward the post office to hand over a short note. The island's chapter was closed in practical terms. A ledger sealed, a note filed, a locket passed to the clerk. Her actions had moved the story from private doubt to official record. The end of the chapter came not with a flourish, but with a knock at a door in the town where the ledger had been lodged. A clerk came to collect details for an inventory and to set an appointment to take the ledger to the authorities. Marta handed him the key that Jonas had kept and the folded note. The clerk lifted the lid, checked the locket, and then shut the chest with a careful motion. As the door closed behind the clerk, Marta's shoulders loosened in a way that showed the physical release of work finished. She walked down the lane with steady steps, the satchel at her side and the knowledge that she had done what she could. She had recorded the trimmed page, attached Nora's note, and sealed the ledger for others to examine. The practical work had resolved the small conflicts of the island that remained within her power. The rest would be for officials and time. The chapter ends with a precise scene. The clerk locking the chest in the municipal office and tucking Ellen's folded page into an envelope marked for inspection. The table held the coil of rope Jonas had brought, the ledger closed and labeled, and a single teacup placed on a side shelf as a token noted in the clerk's log. Those objects were the final, literal evidence of the island's unmaking, and they tied the end of one life there to the orderly, bureaucratic work of the next place. Marta walked away with the satchel and the locket under her coat, her choices made and the ledger sealed.